everyone, I'm here to give a tutorial on how to make a paper mache animal. First, I'm going to start off by showing how to create a structure or an animal with found objects, and then I'll get into how you can make paper mache with simple ingredients that you can find in your home like flour and water. So before we get to the mixture with paper mache and all of that, I just want to show you some of the materials that we have for this project. So we're going to need flour and water eventually. You can find any found objects around your house, so like paper towel, cardboard, or an egg carton. I even have an old rubber glove that has a hole in it. I have an old coffee container. I have lots of different pieces of cardboard. I even have some loose pieces of some foam. And lastly, I even have a lone chopstick. So I have all of this stuff to create my sculpture with, or to create my animal with. And then another material you're going to need is either scrap paper around your house, newspaper, or even you can use a paper bag. And so the paper products are going to be for when you actually get into the paper mache. You might even find a good use to them to help you create the actual sculpture itself. So I'm going to start off by creating my sculpture with my found objects, and then I'll get into how to actually do the paper mache project. The paper mache project usually takes a couple of days because when you coat the project with the paper mache, the wet paper mache, it needs about a day to dry. So give yourself a couple of days to work on this project. Some other materials that I forgot to mention, hi Shakti, are some scissors and some Scotch tape that is a little bit more like this, so less plasticky tape and more of this kind of rough tape. You can even use like painter's tape. You can try plastic tape, it just might make it hard for the paper mache to really stick and stay. So experiment with it. So today I'm going to create a striped marlin. Since we're learning about fish and we're learning about different animals in Australia, I thought the striped marlin would be perfect because it's a fish and you can find it in Australia. So let's get started. So I'm all done with my sculpture. Now I'm ready to make my paper mache mixture. For the paper mache mixture, you want to get a nice wide bowl, a whisk, or even a fork would do. So the ratio is 2 cups water to 1 cup flour. And you're going to mix that really well together so there's no chunks or bumps in it, because those chunks and bumps are going to show up at the end. So you want to make sure it's nice and smooth, just like you'd want nice and smooth pancake batter. You also want to get your newspaper ready and prepared, or any scrap paper that you have. You want to cut it into strips. I would recommend strips that you can handle well. So this strip is a little too long, might be really hard to work with, so I'm going to cut it in half. So about this size strip seems to be good. Based off your project, maybe there might be some sections where you want to make fatter, wider strips, or shorter, skinnier strips, things like that. So it really depends on your project and how big your project is too. But for my straight martin, I would say about this size is okay. Another thing you can use is, put this over here, you can use a paper bag. You can cut up a paper bag and cut that into strips. So I did this already with some other paper bags. I made it a lot smaller. If you use paper bag, it is thicker paper, so you are going to want to let it soak in the solution for a bit longer. So now that we have all that, I'm going to make my mixture. I'm going to add the flour first, so that way you can add the water in slowly. You might find that you want to add maybe a little bit more water or even a little bit more flour based off of the texture you're going for. You kind of want to go for, I would say, maybe a little bit thinner than pancake batter. So you want to have it a little soupier. So I have 1 cup of flour there. And then I'm going to slowly add in my water, mixing it. So the biggest thing when making this kind of paper mache, water and flour really do act like strong glue. So I do recommend, as you can see, I covered my table with more newspaper because it does make quite a mess. If it does get a little chunky and you do find that your project in the end is a little bumpy and lumpy, you can try to use like a light sandpaper and try to sand it down. But it helps. It's a lot easier if you try to start off with a very smooth batter. So as you can see, it's watery. I'm not collecting anything on my spatula. Once when I have that all set up, I'm going to start soaking some of my paper. I have a bunch cut here. I don't want to do too many at a time because they will probably stick together in the bowl. So I'm just going to submerge them in the water. I'm just going to do a few pieces. So now I'm ready to get started. So this is another spot where when you're pulling the paper out of the mixture, you want to make sure you're really clean about it and you go really slow and take your time, because the paper can kind of stick to itself, kind of like when you're trying to tape things and the tape flops on itself and sticks to itself. It's a lot like that. You also don't want to have too much mixture on your piece. If it's really drippy and really wet, it's going to slide around and make it really hard to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold up my piece of newspaper over the bowl. I'm going to take my 2 fingers, kind of like peace fingers, and I'm going to squeegee this paper towel, or this, newspaper out. And then I'm going to just place it on my fish here. I'm going to try to kind of wrap it around. I want to make sure I get all around the edges, especially the spots where it's taped. And the best thing to do is you work from one end and go to the other end, overlapping the paper. This will help it stick and stay as you go. And like I said before, this kind of project does take some time. It's not a one-day ordeal. I'm already on day 2 because it did take me some time to make the actual sculpture, and that was the only time I had in the day to work on it. So let's see, I have 2 pieces down. I'm going to put one last piece here. And so it takes, you probably want to do a good solid 3 layers. It really depends on what material you are using. Like if you're using if you're using paper bags mainly, maybe you won't have to put as many layers on because paper bags are so thick. So it's really dependent on the project and what you're making. I want to make sure when I lay down the paper, it's nice and smoothed out, because if there's any wrinkles in the newspaper or bumps, it will show up at the end. So I want to be mindful of that. 2 layers of paper mache and I'm ready now to add some color to my striped martin. Before I add any paint to my striped martin, I'm actually going to first do a layer of gesso. Gesso is something that artists use when they are using a canvas board. The white gesso is what's on the canvas board. So I'm going to use this. If you don't have your gesso at home, that's okay. It's kind of an unusual thing to have, unless you have an artist at home. You could also try using white paint as a base. Anything so that way when you paint with your acrylics or anything like that, you won't have the newspaper pattern coming through, unless you want that to be part of the look of your sculpture. That can be a really cool look. But since I'm going for a more realistic striped marlin, I'm going to do a layer of gesso. And like I said before, this is on top of my 2 layers of paper mache. If I was paper macheing with like on top of a balloon or something that might want to pop, or something that's hollow, I'd probably want to do more layers, probably closer to about 3 or 4 layers of paper mache. So we're moving on to the final stages of creating our paper mache sculptures. So here you can see I've done the whole marlin, the striped marlin. I've gessoed it, which is kind of like a white paint almost. So I have a nice white canvas to work on. I don't know if you can see it, but I've used pencil to outline some details on it to help me paint it, because that's the last step we're gonna do, is we're gonna paint our sculpture. So I got all my colors out and I created a little paint palette on an old lid, plastic lid. I have my picture to reference for colors, and I have some different size paintbrushes for different jobs, and I even have like a little mixer stick. So let's get started. And so there you have it, folks. I have finished the marlin. I've painted the nice stripes that it has on it. So I started with just cardboard and mixed materials, then used flour and water to make the glue for the paper mache. I used newspaper to do the actual paper macheing with. Then I coated it all with gesso, which is kind of like a white paint. And then I used just acrylic paints to paint it. Thanks for joining me. Bye.